We would like to call Officer Fontes.
All right, officer, if you could make your way up to the witness stand, stand and face my court, just going to administer an oath. And you can have a seat.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer, could you please state your full name and spell for the record?
Yes, it's Mark Fontes, M-A-R-K-F-O-N-T-E-S.
And how are you presently employed?
I'm employed as an investigator in the Modesto Police Department's Major Crimes Unit.
And for how long?
Approximately 4 years.
And were you employed as law enforcement prior to that 4 years?
Yes, I was.
And for how long?
Well, total, I have over 17 years of law enforcement experience.
And you mentioned that you were part of an investigations unit.
Yes, sir.
And do you have any specific assignments?
It's in the Major Crimes Unit. Specifically, we have a focus on narcotics investigations.
And as a part of narcotics investigations, so do you have any specific training related to identifying drugs possessed for sale?
I do.
And what is that training?
Well, I have approximately no less than 300 hours in formal training in narcotics. I have the academy that I attended. I have in the fields training. I have probably several hundred hours of informal training, and that's working with other more experienced investigators throughout my career. I also have, throughout my career, I have talked to users and dealers of narcotics, and I would say that was no less than 1,000 times. And during those conversations, I debriefed them and interviewed them regarding the sales and usage of narcotics.
And have you had any specific training related to sale of fentanyl?
I have.
And is that included in what you just went over?
Correct.
And do you have any training in differentiating between possession versus personal use? And
I do.
And for sales?
I do.
And how many times have you been involved in an investigation involving narcotics for sale?
No less than probably 300 to 400.
And have you spoken to users of fentanyl?
I have.
And have you spoken to drug dealers about methods of packaging, distributing, selling?
I have.
And have any of them been specific to fentanyl?
Yes, they have.
Have you ever testified as an expert in a possession for sale in narcotics, specifically fentanyl, in the county of Stanislaus?
I have.
And how many times?
I would say maybe 4 or 5.
And at this point, the people would like to move Officer Fontes to be an expert in this case.
You're asking the court to recognize
Yes,
him as
sorry.
an expert in the field of
Fentanyl and sales of fentanyl?
identifying fentanyl for purposes of sale versus use.
Yes, and the sales thereof.
And you
Brief one, dear.
can.
Officer Fontes, when you were doing the formal training, who was giving the training?
I'm a member of CNOA, which is California Narcotics Officers Association. I have been so for the last 4 years. And those are instructors that have put on the training.
And these instructors, are they also officers?
Believe so, yes. Retired, some of them.
And you said you had some field hours of training. Were those, that training was following other officers?
Or myself, correct. And speaking with fentanyl users and dealers.
And when you say you had several hundred hours of informal training, were those informal training by officers?
Other officers, yes, or, yeah, sorry.
Did you do any training with any person who wasn't an officer besides users?
During some of my trainings, I believe there are some district attorneys there. And I want to say I attended one where there was maybe a doctor as well.
That person with a doctorate, do you know how many hours you spent with that person?
How many hours did I spend specifically with that person? He taught a block of the instruction course. I don't remember. It was a couple years ago.
And were you instructed by anyone who published in the scientific or scholastic areas of drug use or drug sales? Were any of the instructors published in those circles?
Not to my knowledge.
Have you published any studies or any kind of field studies regarding drug use or drug sales in a scholastic circle?
No.
Would you agree that most of your training and your experience has been as an officer regarding sales?
Correct.
And do you have any specific distinguishment as an officer from any other officer with the same amount of your experience in investigating major crimes?
I'm sorry, say that again.
I'll clear it up. Yes. So do you have any more experience in investigating or distinguishing between sales and use than any other officer who's been in Modesto Police Department for 17 years?
How can he answer that? I mean, how would he possibly know that? He would have to know all of the officers who work for Modesto Police Department and their experience, the way that you phrased that.
Sure. But do you know any other officers that's worked in Modesto Police Department for more than 4 years?
I do.
Okay, and you've been working in Modesto Police Department for 4 years.
I've been working at Modesto Police Department for 17 years.
Okay, so 17 years. Do you know anybody else in Modesto Police Department that's been working there 17 years?
Objection relevance.
I'm going to allow some latitude. Overruled.
Yeah, I know people that have worked 17 years and over. That's what your question is.
Okay. And do they have similar experience in investigating narcotics?
I can't answer what their qualifications are.
Do you believe you have any more education regarding narcotics than any other officer that has been there 17 years?
It does call for speculation, and I don't think that part is relevant. We don't weigh them in relationship to other officers. It's really based on whether he himself qualifies based on his training and experience. So that's sustained.
No further questions.
Do you have any additional questions of this witness? The request.
Not regarding what he just adhered on.
Okay, just on the issue of whether he should be recognized as an expert in the field that I've discussed. Do you have any additional questions on that?
No, Your Honor.
Do you have any additional questions on that?
Not questions, Your Honor.
Do you have an opposition to the court recognizing him as an expert in identifying possession of fentanyl for purposes of sales versus use?
I would object, Your Honor. There hasn't been any distinguishment from any other law enforcement officer. There hasn't been anything established on lack of foundation of his education, only as an officer, not as a published expert regarding the sales or use. And there hasn't been any mention that he's actually done any actual studies of the narcotics itself, only training by other officers.
Well, and that can be enough. It's not required for purposes of determining whether a person qualifies as an expert. It's not required that they receive any particular type of training or any particular type of experience. It has to be sufficient for this court to ascertain that his opinions are helpful, the trier of fact, helpful to its analysis. And I do make that finding, so I will recognize him as an expert in that field.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Now, would you proceed with your questions?
Thank you. Have you had an opportunity to speak with Officer Vincent about this case?
I briefly did in the hallway, yes, sir.
And have you had an opportunity to speak with Officer Gonzalez about this case?
Same in the hallway.
And have you had a chance to review the police reports in this case?
I have.
And were you here for the testimony of Officer Vinson?
I was.
And based on what you examined, your conversation with Officer Vinson and your conversation with Officer Gonzalez and Officer Vinson's testimony, did you formulate an opinion as to whether narcotics found in this case were possessed for sale or for personal use?
I did.
And what is that opinion?
I'm going to object, Your Honor, lack of foundation.
In terms of the information that he knows to render that opinion, or
Yes.
or is this a foundation question as to his expertise?
The foundation to what are the factors?
And I will sustain it on that.
Okay, are you familiar specifically with Modesto Police Report number 24006729?
I am.
And did you review the reports in that case?
I did.
And did you listen to the testimony here today?
I did.
And based on your review of those reports and based on your conversation with Officer Vinson and your conversation with Officer Gonzalez and listening to the testimony of Officer Vinson, did you formulate an opinion if the drugs in this case are for sale?
Renew my objection. Your Honor.
So the question is, did he formulate an opinion? That question I will allow. What his opinion is, he'll have to describe in more detail what he relied on to reach that opinion.
Thank you, Your Honor. Did you formulate an opinion?
I did.
And what was that opinion?
I'm going to object.
So that's the objection that I'm going to sustain.
And what did you base that opinion on?
I based my opinion based on the sheer amount of fentanyl that was recovered from Mr. Flossie.
And did you review how much fentanyl was found on Mr. Flossie?
I did.
And how much was found on Mr. Flossie?
Well, if I can refer to the Department of Justice laboratory results for the fentanyl. So items number 4, 5, and 6 were analyzed, and between those 3 items, it's roughly 42 grams of suspected of fentanyl. However, items 1, 2, and 3, which were submitted into evidence by Officer Vincent, which based on the report have the same appearance, texture, and packaging as items number 4, 5, and 6. I don't know the amount for there, but based on the 42 grams, I formed that my opinion that it is for sales.
Okay, and would you say the 42 grams is a usable amount?
It's for sales.
And is it a usable amount as far as if somebody wanted to use this to become, I don't know, under the influence of fentanyl, would they be able to use a part of this 42 grams in order to achieve that?
Sure.
And so you had the opportunity to speak to users and sellers of fentanyl in the past. Do you know what a dose of fentanyl typically looks like?
Yes.
And what does a dose of fentanyl typically look like?
It's about 1/10 of a gram.
So 42 grams, then how many doses would you say that is?
I'm going to object, Your Honor, to lack of foundation.
I think that you have to ask the question differently. I will sustain it based on the way you have asked it.
Thank you, Honor. So you said the the normal dosage was 0.1 grams. Looking over these reports and listening to this testimony, speaking to these officers, how many doses would the DOJ items 3, 4, and 5 cover?
Roughly 420.
And if the defendant had some type of instrument to ingest fentanyl with on his person, would that change your opinion?
No.
And why is that?
Because first off, there are drug dealers and users, and those people are people who sell drugs to support their drug habits. And there are also drug dealers who carry the paraphernalia on them for their users to use when they buy off them, because some people, drug users, do not like to carry that paraphernalia on them.
And would it change your opinion if the defendant said that he was a user of fentanyl?
No.
And why is that?
Well, based on the sheer amount, and I'm basing it off the 42 grams, it's uncommon for a user to possess that amount. Users, in my experience, only possess what is readily available to them for that use, and maybe a use or two in the future. They don't possess that much because they typically do not have the funds to purchase the drug. They are afraid of getting robbed of the drug. They're afraid of getting solicited by other friends or other people to use their drug that they just paid for. And they also are afraid of overdosing on that drug because fentanyl is a very highly addictive and deadly drug.
And just to backtrack just momentarily here, do you base your opinion only on the amount of drugs?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Do you base your opinion that this is for sales only because of the amount of drugs, or is there anything else? Is there anything else you take into consideration?
I'm not sure I'm understanding your question, but just on the sheer
forgive me.
amount. I didn't see, if you're asking for other indicia, I didn't see any other indicia was collected to support sales in the report, if that's what you're asking.
No other indicia?
Not that I caught or I'm aware of.
Would look at the report, refresh your recollection.
Object, Your Honor, improper refreshing of recollection.
Sustained. Also, I have not received any other evidence of indicia in terms of the evidence here.
Okay, I'll ask a different question. So you say you have dealt with a lot of users. Do they normally have multiple bags to carry their fentanyl in?
I have heard evidence of that. So if that's what you're asking, I have heard that evidence and I would permit that question.
Thank you. And do users usually have their fentanyl in multiple bags?
No.
Does having the fentanyl in multiple bags indicate anything to you?
Yes, based on the way it was packaged in the clear plastic baggies and the consistency, there were each item number 4, 5, and 6 were similar in weight, which tells me that it was prepackaged and ready for sales.
Thank you, nothing further.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Officer Fonce, when you say prepackaged drugs, if somebody had bought 4 or 5 packages, how do you know that that wasn't just bought for themselves?
I wouldn't know unless I was there with them or they told me or I had some other proof. However, as I said in my testimony, based on my experience, I know that a typical fentanyl user does not purchase drugs in bulk that way.
Okay, so, but people buy multiple packages
They can, yeah.
and it's not necessarily for sales, right?
Objection calls for speculation.
He's an
Who is an
expert.
expert?
Can you ask the question again?
It's not necessarily for sale.
In my experience, people who buy multiple packages are buying them for the purposes for sales.
And how many packages do you have to buy in order for you to come to the conclusion that it's for sales?
It usually depends on the weight and the type of drug.
So if it's 2 packages and they were 1 gram each, is that a purchase for sale?
In my opinion, it would not be.
Okay. If it's 3 packages, 1 gram each, would that be purchased for sale?
It could be.
Okay. So just 1 extra gram would be all of a sudden lead you to a conclusion it's sales?
Not all of a sudden. I take into the totality of the circumstances of the investigation. Indicia found, going through phones, text messages, interviews.
And here there was no text messages that you reviewed.
None.
And there was no other indicia except for the amount and packages.
Correct.
Okay. So you don't have any more evidence regarding your conclusion for sales.
Correct.
So if somebody goes and buys a 12-pack of Coca-Cola, that because it's more than 2 or 3 Coca-Colas, that's likely for sale?
Objection
Are you talking about
relevance.
selling Coca-Cola, the beverage? I think 352 applies here. I don't see how that's relevant to an issue of controlled substances.
Okay, let's say somebody gets one pill of hydrocodone, is that for sales?
If they purchase one pill,
Yes.
if they're purchasing it from someone it'd be for personal use, would be my speculation.
And then two pills.
Again, it would vary on the drug and the quantity of the drug.
Okay.
However, I'm basing my opinion based on the sheer amount and my experience.
What's the amount of pills for hydrocodone that you would conclude would be for sales?
The objection relevance.
What is, I mean, shouldn't we be talking about the substance here? Because we're not talking about, there's not an allegation that there was.
Well, there has to be some, he's an expert, there has to be some factor.
But let's talk
into the
about,
amount that gets you to sales.
okay, but not of hydrocodone. You're talking about fentanyl. So you can ask those questions
Sure.
with regard to fentanyl.
Okay. What is the amount of fentanyl you have to have that you're going to conclude to sales?
Based on the sheer amount with no indicia, I would say, based on my training experience, 3.5 grams, which is known as an 8-ball on the street.
So 3.5 grams, if you buy an 8-ball, is for sales?
In my opinion, it would be yes.
Okay. And you're saying that 0.10 grams is a dosage?
Correct.
And how do you come to that conclusion?
When I speak with the users and dealers of fentanyl and I ask them, that is the most commonly answer I got back, and that's how I formed my opinion.
Have you ever tested fentanyl?
I have not tested fentanyl just because of the exposure risk.
Okay. Have you ever talked to somebody who used more than 0.10 grams for dosage?
I have.
Have you talked to anyone that used less than 0.10 grams for dosage?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay. And is that 0.10 would be the minimum that somebody might use for dosage?
That's the most common answer I have received during my interviews with drug users and sellers.
And you haven't experienced somebody using less for a dose than 0.10?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
So in your experience, that would be the minimum?
With my experience, I formed that opinion because during my interviews and my experience, I'm told that that is the amount of drug that is needed to reach the high to get the effects of the drug that they're seeking to get.
And to have a long-term effect, you would have to use more. Wouldn't that be correct?
What do you mean by long-term effect?
Okay, so you're talking about the minimum to get a high.
For them to feel the effects to get a high of fentanyl,
Okay.
yes.
And do you know how long the lasting effects of fentanyl are for a dosage of 0.10?
It's reported to be between 4 to 6 hours, depending on tolerance level and the purity of the drug.
Okay. Have you observed somebody with the effects of fentanyl after a dosage?
Not that I can recall.
Okay, so you haven't seen anybody on fentanyl immediately after they dosed?
I've seen people who have claimed to use fentanyl. I can't say that they actually used it because I didn't see them using
Okay.
it.
And have you observed the person on how long they would be affected by fentanyl from dosage to when they felt that they didn't feel the effects?
No, I didn't.
So you personally don't have knowledge of how long the effects of fentanyl last?
Personally, no.
And you haven't done any studies regarding that, correct?
Correct.
And when regarding the dosage, what was the maximum somebody said they used for one dosage?
It was up to 1 gram.
And this is just somebody you've spoken to?
Correct.
So you don't know if somebody who has a higher tolerance or daily use may use more than 1 gram?
It could.
You don't know how many times somebody who often uses 1 gram can have multiple doses in a day?
Say that again?
So somebody who uses 1 gram for a dosage, how many times would they dose a day?
Some people report using 2 to 3 times, and some people have said 3 to 4 times.
So somebody who uses 1 gram per dosage, that would equal to 2-3 grams per day, correct?
Correct, but that is an exceedingly high amount, and it's very rare.
And it would be somebody who would have a high tolerance.
Correct.
So you wouldn't be surprised if somebody who has a high tolerance tells you that they use 2 to 3 grams a day.
I've been told that before, so yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
And if somebody uses 3 grams a day, the total weight here is about 42 grams, that's right?
That is correct, and that's between items 5, 4, 5, and 6. And like I mentioned earlier, items 1, 2, and 3 were not analyzed, which
And you didn't analyze them
I did
personally?
not know.
Okay. So you don't know, you have no knowledge of exactly what's in there?
Correct.
And so if we're looking at 42 grams, that's, if you divide that by 3 per day, that's somewhere around about 2 weeks worth.
Correct.
And that's if you solely are the person using it, correct?
Correct.
And in your experience, when you look at whether something is for sales, you're looking not just weight, but if there's a scale that's found,
Correct.
and if there's actual an actual exchange, that would be something you'd factor in.
If I saw like a hand-to-hand transaction, correct.
And you would be looking for a payout sheet or payo sheet, I think.
Those are not as common these days because everything's done on the phone, usually in notes and kept on the phone, so we don't see those as common anymore.
Okay. But if you saw a payo sheet, that would be something you would factor in, correct?
Correct.
And if you saw a bunch of messages on a phone that talked about sale, that'd be something you'd factor in.
Correct.
And if you're missing those factors, would that make it less likely or more likely, less likely or more likely that there was sales, in your opinion?
Again, I take a totality of the circumstance of the investigation to form my opinion. And again, in this one, I reviewed the reports and I read that Mr. Flossie told one of the officers that he uses 2 to 3 times a day. And then he told another officer he uses 3 to 4 times a day. So there's an inconsistency there. And then going back to your weight, if he used 3 to 4 grams, he would, go back to what he told the officers, is that the fentanyl he found on him was purchased for a month's worth. So if you factor in the 42 grams that he had, that's using 3 times a day, I believe it's 14 days. And if he uses 4 times a day, that's 10 days. So if there's another inconsistency in his statement there.
But that's if he's using it every day, right?
Correct.
And sometimes maybe you use less?
Well, based on my experience, fentanyl users use every day.
Okay. But it's possible if he uses 2 times a day, it may extend it than more than 14 days,
It
correct?
could, yes.
And here your conclusion was just based on the amount and there was other baggies found, correct?
Correct.
If you were to find a scale, would that increase or strengthen your opinion?
Would add to it.
Okay. And if you found messages regarding sale, that would increase or strengthen your opinion, correct?
It would add to it.
So when you don't find those things, would you agree that your opinion would be lessened?
I disagree.
Okay. So not finding those things doesn't tell you that there's less likelihood of sales.
I'm not understanding what you're asking me.
Yes. So if you only find one factor, right? You can form an opinion on one factor, correct?
Correct.
But if you have more factors that add to your opinion, wouldn't that strengthen your opinion?
Sure.
So if you take away those other factors and only have one factor, wouldn't you believe that your opinion is weaker than it would if you had the other factors?
I disagree. And again, I based my opinion based on the sheer amount that was found. And not only that, but the 3 items that were tested were similar in weight.
And when somebody who buys in bulk, would they separate, a user, would they separate how much they bought in order to ration what they're doing?
Not in my experience.
So people who buy drugs don't ever separate what they're using?
They may, but not that I'm aware of, not that I've seen.
If you were buying for 2 people, would you agree if they split it, they put it in separate baggies?
Conviction relevance.
Overruled.
They could, and to go, if I can, Your Honor, to go back on his prior question, if somebody's buying drugs, they would repackage it.
I object, Your Honor, non-responsive.
Well, it is non-responsive. I think he's just trying to answer the second question. Let's leave it as it is. I sustain the objection.
Now, if somebody wanted to use a certain amount per week, would you agree that that user would likely split it up in, if they were looking for a month, at least split it up between 4 weeks?
Objection calls for speculation.
He's an expert.
I think he's already answered this question, not in his experience. People who buy the drug do not split it up. He's already answered that in his experience. So I would sustain the objection because I think it's been asked and answered.
No more questions, Your Honor.
Do you have any redirect?
No, Your Honor. I do have, I would like to put Officer Vincent on the stand for 2 more questions, and that's it. But no redirect.
All right, thank you for your testimony, and you are excused.
Your Honor, we asked what the offer of proof is for.
What did you want to have him say?
I just want to make sure that when he first observed the car, if it was moving or if it was parked.
It's for transportation.
Your Honor,
Thank you,
well,
sir.
that's fine.
You can recall him for those 2 questions.
Officer Vincent?
Your Honor, is it really relevant if my client wasn't driving?
I think it must be, because it's the same. The idea is that they're transporting in a vehicle. I don't have to be driving to.
Just trying to save.
I know. You're still under oath. So you were subject to recall.
Officer Vincent, when you first saw the Impala, was it parked?
No.
Was it moving?
Yes.
Thank you, nothing further.
Cross-examination.
Yes, did you turn on your lights while it was moving or when it was parked?
I turned my lights while it was moving.
No further questions.
All right, you can, now is he excused?
Yes,
You
thank
have
you.
a seat once again at council table.
Thank you.
I don't want to say I don't want to hear any arguments, but I would say I have listened carefully to the evidence. And what I think is the challenges to the state of the evidence really go more to the issues of trial than they do preliminary hearing. And I say that because I have received uncontroverted testimony from somebody this court recognized as an expert that the items were possessed for purposes of sale. I have heard that the defendant had made certain statements, but I don't have any evidence that they were purchased for another person. I don't have any evidence that they were purchased to be shared. I don't have anything like that. And so if you want to make some argument, that's perfectly fine. I don't want to shut you off, but I do want to say that I think for purposes of preliminary hearing, which is a low burden, with only the evidence of the people, I am inclined to make a holding order.
I think the court knows what my arguments would be, so I'll submit.
I do think, and I think those are better arguments for trial, and they will potentially be effective arguments at trial, but for preliminary purpose, for purposes of preliminary hearing, I think the people have met their burden. So it appears to the court that the offense in count 1, a felony violation of Health and Safety Code Section 11-351 has been committed. There is sufficient evidence to believe the defendant is guilty thereof. It appears to the court that the offense in count 2, a felony violation of Health and Safety Code Section 11-352A has been committed. There is sufficient cause to believe the defendant is guilty thereof. I need to set his arraignment. What I was going to suggest is maybe having the preliminary hearing when we come back for the arraignment. That's one option. That would be in 2 weeks, the 31st.
You're finally doing that, so you come back once instead of come back next week and then come back again.
To me, that makes more
No, it makes sense, Your Honor, just efficiency wise for my client not to be held.
be held in the backup for 2 days instead of 1. All right, so the case that ends in 983, I'll reset the preliminary hearing. I'm still fine. I don't need further time waiver or anything like that. I'm still setting it within a reasonable period of time since Mr. Flossie had waived time once. Now the prelim is being set January 31st at 8:30 in the morning. And so is the arraignment on the case that ends in 4723. And Mr. Flossie, you're ordered to appear for both of those hearings